Let's just start there broadly about why there is such a lack of public information about the true extent of our troop presence in the region, as Israel, in my opinion, is committing a genocide, and the escalating tensions and potentially a region-wide conflict, like the threat of that looms very greatly.
So to take a country like Jordan, just to give you an example, where 3 U.S. service members were killed on Sunday by a drone attack. The reason a lot of people responded to that saying, wait, we have troops in Jordan? Now, national security reporters like myself, people in the military, it's an open secret that we have troops in Jordan. It's pretty well understood. Now, why don't ordinary people know it? Because the government doesn't advertise it very much. They don't like to acknowledge it. The reason for that is host nation sensitivities. The Jordanians don't like that the U.S. is present because they don't like the conduct of Israel. They don't like the U.S. support for it. Jordan is, home to millions of Palestinian citizens and refugees. And so for that reason, they don't talk about the size of the U.S. presence. In fact, they try to keep the bases to a certain size so that there's not a big enough footprint that people notice it. And that's just one country. U.S. troops are in virtually every country in the Middle East, with the exception, I think, of Iran and Lebanon. And the government doesn't talk about it. And so when we, the public, find out about it, unfortunately, is when they're killed.
If there were Iranian troops, say in Mexico or something to that effect, or in Cuba or right off the coast of the country, like that would be such a provocation, or considered such a provocation by our government, that we would probably go to war over that.
And the U.S. government goes to great lengths to be able to conceal the nature of that contradiction and to keep as quiet as possible. So when the New York Times reports that the U.S. is surging troops to Jordan, like I just said, they don't say Jordan, they say they have moved assets to the region.
Yeah, your reporting on Yemen talks about that, how basically the Pentagon just said, a spokesperson said, that they are not aware of U.S. forces on the ground. But in a December report from the White House, it says that there are U.S. troops on the ground. Talk about that contradiction and how two parts of the federal government can say opposing things at once. The other piece of reporting that you uncovered is that you obtained documentation showing, it was from the Air Force, showing that there are military orders to be on standby to deploy support troops if the United States chooses to use ground troops to support Israel. That is a direct contradiction to the public statements made by Biden. What is some of what you found on this?
Yeah, so the White House National Security Spokesman, John Kirby, very early on in the conflict made clear, whatever we do, there's no boots on the ground. Now, within a few days of that, there was a picture of Joe Biden posing with some special operations troops that the White House posted on Instagram. They immediately had to take it down. The special operations troops, that's the really secret squirrel guys that you're supposed to hide their identities. And so within a couple of days of that, I think it became hard to hide that the U.S. had spec ops in Israel. And so the New York Times came out with a report talking about the commando presence that we had in the country. And since then, we've seen evidence of U.S. drones flying over Gaza. And certainly we've sent, I think, troops in the thousands surged, again, the way the New York Times reports it, to the region.
Iraq is another artificial construct. It's not a real country in the sense that we think of ourselves in Europe as nations. You can argue that we in the West, in the United States, are an artificial construct in many ways. We weren't always that way, but increasingly it looks that way. But that's not true in the Middle East. Iraq was drawn up along with Jordan and a number of other countries at the Versailles Peace Conference. So they said, look, he may not be perfect, but the country is stable. We can do business with it. We can live with it. And he's focused primarily or disproportionately on Iran. We ignored it. We went back in 2003 and did more damage. We created the Kurdish monster in many respects that now threatens or has been threatening Turkey for some time, despite Mr. Erdogan's best efforts to try and tame that. So that the Turks look at us and say, you're nothing but trouble. You've caused us unending heartache. Same thing is true in most of the Arab countries. I think we need to understand that. And Americans, they don't. We're back to this. So the Americans wear the white hats, we're the good guys. We come in, peace, love, and harmony burst out from every direction. No, it's not the case. So we need to get those troops out. Donald Trump wanted to get them out when I was there in November and December and early January. He wanted them out of Iraq. He wanted them out of Syria. He was obstructed. He was obstructed by his own party on the Hill. He was obstructed by numerous lobbies. We need to get out. Syria is another one. And our positions in these countries are, by any stretch of the imagination, illegal. The Iraqi parliament voted us out back in 2020, said, get out, leave our country. So much for our respect for democracy. We said, oh, sorry, can't do that. We're staying. Syria is another case. We are there illegally. There's nothing there that justifies our presence or control of this tiny oil spot that's up in the northeast of the country. And now we are viewed as unwanted aliens and potentially threatening, not just to the Iranians and the Iranian proxy of militias, but by the Sunnis and the Turks. So we need to get out, but we won't get out. We'll stay. And things are going to get a lot worse because you're looking at two sides of the same coin. One kind is military power. The other coin is primarily economic. You have the Suez Canal. You've got the Straits of Hormuz. What does it take to shut them down and block them? Not a great deal. And then you have Iran. Iran is not like Turkey. Its population is not violently anti-Israeli. It isn't. It's very upset by what's happening. But the Iranians are much more moderate in their views. Unfortunately, though, the Iranians know that if they are to be taken seriously in the region and by the Islamic world, they have to take Gaza very seriously. And they've done that. We haven't even discussed the Turks yet. I'm talking about Iran. The biggest mistake we could make would be to attack Iran. And pointing to Iran and blaming them for what happens in Iraq and Syria is infantile. Those militias want us out of their countries. That's what it's about. Get out. You're not wanted. And the people that have been working to bring on a war with Iran for over a decade are saying everything they possibly can, once again, to indict Iran and provoke a war with it. I mean, remember, President Trump went through this in 2019. You had Bolton at the time and Pompeo, McKenzie and CENTCOM. All these people were, well, it's Iran, it's Iran, it's Iran. We literally set them up to shoot down the global hawk and then said, that's it. And oh, by the way, Mr. President, we have the strike packages ready to go. And President Trump said two things. First of all, how many people did we kill with the global hawk? Well, of course, none. It's unmanned. And there was no pilot. Oh, well, then what happens after we launch the strikes? What a great question. What happens if we land troops in South Vietnam? Well, we'll see what happens. We're going in. We're going to march in. We're going to do these things because it's the right thing to do. This is the problem. This is the threat to the United States. The existential threat to our country and our society is no afterthought, impulse, emotion, passion. There is no strategic reason for direct combat between ourselves and Iran. Neither is there any reason for that between ourselves and Russia or between ourselves and China. We are in other people's countries, in other people's neighborhoods, trying to dictate outcomes. That's over. We are not the great superpower of 91, and they have all recovered and become infinitely more powerful economically, militarily over the last 30 years. We need to understand that however much we want to be, we are no longer the center of the universe.
What the Israelis did is they went and bombed Syria, Damascus and Aleppo, and at the same time, mysteriously, there's an attack by Al-Qaeda. Now, keep in mind, Al-Qaeda in Syria was rebranded to Al-Nusra Front, Jabhat al-Nusra, and then to HTS, which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. It's Al-Qaeda. It's just rebranded. And mysteriously, they both attacked at the same time, and they killed soldiers and they killed civilians. The Israelis were also busy bombing Lebanon. They killed 16 people, and then Hezbollah fired back and killed a few Israelis as well. The difference is that when Hezbollah are firing, for example, in the video I just showed you here, this is a military installation. Look at this. These are military, they're illegal military outposts. They are not houses with civilians inside them, right? Whereas the Israelis, they kill Lebanese civilians, Syrian civilians, women, men, children. Doesn't matter to them. They don't care. They do whatever they want. And even before October 7th, they were going in. Many of you will remember they were going in and dropping bombs on Syria almost every week, almost, let's say on a bi-weekly basis. And they would also destroy the airports, right? They did this to cripple the infrastructure in Damascus, in Aleppo, the same two cities. The Israelis are not just in Gaza. The focus is on Gaza. But the Israelis have a stranglehold on the entire Middle East, on Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, but also on the countries like Jordan and Egypt, who, where the leaders basically are friends with the Israelis, but the people are not. Israel's bombing of the Iranian embassy in Damascus has left at least 5 people dead and killed strategic partners in Syria's war on Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In addition, we had the January attack, which was the deadliest since the revolution, and on the anniversary of General Soleimani's assassination, who was killed by the Americans at Israel's behest. The same day of the terrorist attack, Israel assassinated the head of Hamas political bureau, Saleh Harouri, in Beirut, which further proves that Israel has a hand in all these attacks. As of late, Israel has been busy bombing deeper and deeper inside Lebanon and causing larger casualties to try and provoke Hezbollah into using their larger weapons so they reveal their hand. One overlooked aspect of the war are the Israeli attacks on Syria. And just now, one of the most lethal when Syria was bombed by Israel and attacked by Al-Qaeda simultaneously, resulting in the deaths of 40 Syrians. Not only was the timing suspicious, but we know for a fact that Israel have worked together with Al-Qaeda to try and overthrow the secular government of Syria.
You would have to treat Al-Qaeda fighters, but not Hezbollah fighters.
We have a different account with Hezbollah. Al-Qaeda, to the best of my recollection, has up to now not attacked Israel.
Has attacked your number one ally and protector and sponsor in the United States of America. There was a quote-unquote war on terror being going on for 15 years.
While the UK and US are bombing Yemen, it now turns out the Americans are building a secret airstrip on the Yemeni island of Socotra. Yemen's blockade has been very successful, striking 86 ships and now extending all the way to the Indian Ocean. Out of the blue, now Al-Qaeda have resurfaced, reactivated in the rear, fighting with other factions and announcing a new leader. What a coincidence. This is naught but an attempt by the Americans and Israelis to open another front on the Yemenis because they successfully blocked their ships. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are the mobile armies of the Americans and Israelis. When they're disgruntled or unhappy, they set their dogs loose to carry out terrorist attacks, create instability, and undermine the security of other nations, particularly those they've been unable to breach or control, like Syria, Russia, or Iran. Because they're unable to win using conventional methods, they use proxies and terrorist groups to assault these governments and to try and loosen their grip on power. The terrorist attacks in Russia, China, and Iran are unprecedented, and they mark an escalation in the confrontation between the West and Global South.
So this is Naftali Bennett. He is a former prime minister of Israel. Just a year or so ago, he was prime minister of Israel. And he published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying the US and Israel need to take on Iran directly, make the Ayatollahs pay for sowing chaos through their Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthi proxies. Now, think if any other foreign politician published an op-ed in a Western media outlet, in one of the top Western media outlets, calling for us to send our sons and daughters into war, everyone would be freaking out about this. He concludes by saying the US and Israel must set the clear goal of bringing down Iran's evil regime. Not only is this possible, it is vital for the safety and security of the Middle East and the entire civilized world. So now you'll recall at the beginning, there was this report originally in the Wall Street Journal claiming that Iran was directly involved in the October 7th attacks. And so early on in the conflict, people like John Bolton and others, right-wing Republican politicians here in the US, started to build this case for war with Iran, and they haven't really stopped. But once that initial report got kind of shot down, there was a little bit of, you heard a little bit less of, hey, now's the time to go after Iran. Because again, they are not directly implicated in the October 7th attacks. But now we're coming back around to, as we're seeing what the Houthis are doing with regard to the Red Sea, we're coming back around to this incredibly hawkish case for direct war and conflict with Iran. The next example I'll show you, again, you won't be surprised by this because Lindsey Graham is always looking for an excuse to call for war with Iran, it seems, but he says the U.S. should hit an Iranian base and blow it off the map. Let me read you this from Newsweek. Senator Lindsey Graham is urging the Biden administration to blow parts of Iran off the map. The South Carolina Republican said he told Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin not to show weakness and make clear what the U.S. red lines for retaliatory attack are. Without Iran, there are no Houthis. Graham told Fox News on Wednesday, the Houthis are completely backed by Iran. I have been saying for 6 months now, hit Iran. They have oil fields out in the open. They have the Revolutionary Guard headquarters you can see from space. Blow it off the map.
A terrorist attack has killed at least 100 people in Tehran at a ceremony commemorating the previous assassination of IRGC leader Qasem Soleimani. That's from the BBC, but it's being reported around the world. It's unclear at this point, who carried out this terrorist attack, but suspicion is largely focused on Israel. And I'll talk about a couple reasons why that's the case. First of all, this comes shortly after, or one day after a Hamas leader was killed in Beirut, and it comes a week after Israel killed, who was it? Razi Mousavi, who was an IRGC general, Iranian general based in Syria. So this is this would be the third Israeli attack if this one is confirmed to be from Israel. Why on earth would Israel want to expand its current war into a regional war by drawing Iran into a conflict? And I talked to Trita earlier about this. He made a couple of points. One is that there is a consensus now among the Israeli elite that the previous policy of, quote unquote, managing the conflict when it came to the Palestinians was shown to be a failure by October 7th. And so rather than manage the conflict, they need to basically eliminate the potential for conflict. But the way to do that is not, according to this Israeli government, to come to some type of a peace deal, but it is to eliminate the opponent, eliminate the adversary completely. And so that rationale, the rejection of the premise of manage the conflict, is now being applied, according to Parsi, to Hezbollah. So the idea would be that you draw Iran into the conflict, you persuade Hezbollah to launch retaliatory strikes, and then Israel then launches disproportionately large retaliatory strikes against those and eliminates the threat of Hezbollah from Lebanon, which then allows settlements in northern Israel to be unmolested by any threat from Israel. Now,
will Israel drag the U.S. into another ruinous war and lay out the case very clearly that, as the U.S. is trying to assemble this coalition to go after the Houthis and figure out how to respond in all these various ways, that Biden has blocked the most clear solution to all of these problems, which is to push for a ceasefire in Gaza?
Absolutely. I mean, we have four areas of potential escalation right now. The Lebanese-Israeli border, Iraq and Syria with the militias attacking U.S. troops, the Red Sea because of what the Houthis are doing, and then, of course, a potential direct confrontation between Iran and Israel. But the easiest and fastest way of actually de-escalating the situation is a ceasefire. And we know that for certain because during the 6 days that there was a ceasefire, that's the 6 days in which the Iraqi militias completely ceased all attacks on U.S. troops. So we know for certain that at least there's a very significant likelihood of that succeeding. But it appears to be the one option that the Biden administration is the least inclined to pursue, even though it seems to be the most effective. In fact, that for 20 years, the Israelis have done everything they can to get the U.S. to go into war with Iran. And just remember what happened a couple of years ago when Netanyahu was pressing Donald Trump to attack Iran after the U.S. elections when Trump had lost. And Trump thought that perhaps by starting a war, he would be able to overturn the elections. And he was pushed by Netanyahu to do so, and there were counter pressure from Milley, etc. The Israelis have tried to get the United States to go to war with Iran for more than 20 years. They've been pushed back by previous presidents. Even Trump pushed back prior to that specific incident. And he actually told the Israelis, if you think this is a good idea, you should go ahead and do it on your own. And did not want to have a part of it. Obama pushed back against this. Now the Israelis find themselves with the most deferential president that I can remember when it comes to Israeli military strategies and objectives. And they may just believe that this is the one opportunity they have waited for. Netanyahu in particular, who was in charge back then when they were trying to start a war with Iran. And the way the Israelis wanted to start a war is that they would do something, but they would drag the U.S. into it. Given how Biden has gone along with almost everything Israel has done right now, it wouldn't be inconceivable that the Israelis would think that this is the best opportunity they have yet.
There is this argument out there of like, oh, you all act like the U.S. could just push a button, this would all be over, and really they're their own country, and even if we were opposed to it, they would continue and do what they want to do. What is your response to that? Does the U.S. really have significant leverage in this situation?
Of course it does. It's an absurd notion to say that the U.S. doesn't. I mean, we have that Israeli major general who just admitted it last month, saying that all these weapons are coming from the U.S. If the U.S. cuts off the tap, we can't fight, period. So it's very clear. I mean, Biden has shipped 10,000 tons of weapons and ammunition to Israel since the beginning of this war. The Israelis need this to continue, particularly mindful of the pace and quantity of bombardments that they're raining down on Gaza, which far exceeds what the U.S. did in Mosul, for instance, against ISIS. But he also raises the other question. If it is so, let's assume for a second that the United States doesn't have that leverage. Okay, then why are we sending these weapons? You can say that the U.S. doesn't have the leverage to stop it. Why are we fueling it? Answer that question then. If it is so that we cannot stop it, fine, perhaps we can't. But why are we fueling it? Why are we sending more weapons in that case? That's the question that is not being answered.
And so the nightmare only deepens. Iran's military strike against Israel yesterday was inevitable. Israel knew it was inevitable. That's because about 2 weeks ago, Israel bombed Iran's consulate in Damascus, killing 2 Iranian generals and 5 military officers. Now, put bluntly, you only bomb the consulate of a foreign state if you know that that foreign state is almost inevitably going to strike you back. If a foreign state blew up an American consulate somewhere, killing 2 American generals and 5 American military officers, we all know what would happen. The US would launch a massive military intervention against the offending nation. If, say, Iran blew up the Israeli consulate somewhere, again, we all know Israel would bomb that country.
Breaking, Israel calls for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council over the Iranian attack. It's strange to be Israel. You violate a mountain of UN resolutions, condemn the UN at every turn, bomb UN schools and shelters, murder UN employees, and then you demand a UN meeting over another country responding to your bombing of their consulate. It's comical. It's laughable, right? It's a giant joke. The other day we talked about the breaking news that Iran did a retaliatory strike against Israel. The reason for that is because Israel attacked an Iranian consulate in Syria. So in other words, there was a direct act of war. It was aggression on the part of Israel against Iran. Iran was put in basically an unwinnable situation because if they don't respond, then yet again, it's another example of Israel kind of like slapping them around. And, domestically, that would have made Iran look incredibly weak. And internationally, same thing. Iran would have looked weak and Israel would have known, hey, we can get away with doing whatever the hell we want to do, not only to Iran, but also to Hezbollah and Lebanon. And you know how they are. You know how Israel is. So Iran decided, all right, we're going to do a counterattack. We're going to retaliate. But the way they did it was very strategic because they decided it's like a virtue signal response. We're going to give them like hours of warning, therefore giving them the ability not only to fire up Iron Dome, but to go even beyond that and basically knock all these missiles and these drones out of the sky. It was kind of like almost like a fake retaliation, a retaliation in name only. It gives them enough plausible deniability to look at anybody who says they're weak and say, no, we attack back. That's not true. But at the same time, it gives Iran an opportunity in a back channel with the U.S. to tell the U.S., look, we don't want war, so here's your warning. Here's your heads up. If this goes one step further, then it is going to be all-out war. Okay. So that's effectively what happened. Now let me give you some analysis of this. So Omar Badr, who's very good on this stuff, we've had him on Crystal Kyle and Friends, highly recommend checking out his episodes. He said the following: 3 things to understand about Iran's retaliatory strike on Israel. Paradoxically, the strike was extremely significant, demonstrating Iran's boldness and capacity for deterrence, but also deliberately designed to minimize casualties to try to avoid an all-out war. By the way, I should also point out, they were targeting military installations. Quite the opposite of what Israel does. And in fact, I saw some neocon Zionists on Twitter showing like, here's a picture of Israel before the Iranian attack and after the Iranian attack, and the pictures look the same. And it's like, you're doing more of a self-own than anything else because what you're saying is Iran only targets military installations, whereas we target all civilian infrastructure all over the place. So he continues. After Israel struck the Iranian consulate in Damascus, it threatened that any response launched from Iranian territory would be met with a response on Iranian territory. This threat was intended to bully Iran into capitulating, but it had the opposite effect. Iran felt forced to respond from its own territory to demonstrate that it is not intimidated by Israel's threats, and did it via a cautious yet large and multifaceted attack to showcase, as a sample if you will, what it is capable of should Israel want a major confrontation. There's also speculation that the diversity of Iran's strike was intended to activate all of Israel's defenses so Iran could get deeper insight into these capabilities and figure out how to overcome them should a major war break out. That's an interesting point that I didn't think of. Nonetheless, Iran really wants to avoid a major regional war. It doesn't want to risk a confrontation with the USA, which is why they seem to have deliberately avoided targeting any sites that would cause mass casualties. Israel is now in a bind. The US, like Iran, also signaled it doesn't want a regional war, though some in Congress seem to want one. Some is an understatement. I've seen so many statements from Republicans in Congress like, yeah, war with Israel, war with Iran. So now it's up to Israel to decide how far they want to take this confrontation, knowing it will be extremely costly to everyone. For now, though, Netanyahu's gamble that the consulate strike would either lead to total Iranian capitulating or an Iranian overreaction that would lead the US to strike Iran, which is Bibi's dream scenario, appears to have failed. But the situation remains very dangerous and precarious. All of this happening not just against the backdrop of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, but because of Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. Unconditional US backing for Israel's onslaught is bringing the region to the brink, and we urgently need to put an end to it. Netanyahu's remaining gamble is that this regional tension would distract from his horrific war on Palestinian existence, which he believes must continue to cover up his strategic failures to achieve anything. We must not be distracted from this central horror. By the way, also, it's very clear, Netanyahu knows as soon as the war is over, then his ass is done politically. He's out of there. So he has every incentive in the world, not only to keep bombing Gaza relentlessly, but also now to start a new conflict with Iran. Statement from President Joe Biden on Iran's attacks against the state of Israel. Earlier today, Iran and its proxies operating out of Yemen, Syria, and Iraq launched an unprecedented air attack against military facilities in Israel. It's interesting that he openly admitted it was military facilities. I condemn these attacks in the strongest possible terms. By the way, did Biden say anything when Israel attacked the Iranian consulate in Syria illegally? He said nothing. But he releases a statement for this. At my direction to support the defense of Israel, the U.S. military moved aircraft and ballistic missile defense destroyers to the region over the course of the past week. Thanks to these deployments and the extraordinary skill of our service members, we helped Israel take down nearly all of the incoming drones and missiles. Again, let's be clear. Iran gave ample warning so they would be able to do this. That was the point. Tomorrow, I will convene my fellow G7 leaders to coordinate a united diplomatic response to Israel's brazen attack. To Iran's brazen attack, excuse me. My team will engage with their counterparts across the region. We will stay in close touch with Israel's leaders. All right, then we have this. This is also really interesting. So Iran's chief of staff said the following. Our attack is over and we do not wish to continue it, but we will respond forcefully if Israel targets our interests. Israel crossed red lines by targeting our consulate in Damascus, and it had to be responded to. So in other words, again, this is Iran saying, you forced our hand, we had to do this, we went soft, it's a virtue signal attack, that's why we gave you so much warning, you shot all the things out of the sky, but now let's call it even Stevens and end it. What Iran perhaps doesn't know, as much as they should, is that Israel and Netanyahu are now going to use this, and they are very likely going to retaliate again, and we're off to the races, because this is what Netanyahu wants.
Wars are fought with wallets. The Israelis spent over $1 billion to shoot down 99% of the rockets. Iran spent $35 million in total. That means the Israelis spend $2 million per missile to shoot down a drone that costs a few thousand. You do the math. Now, Iran also gained massive amounts of intelligence. They know what Israel's anti-missile capabilities are, their strengths, their weaknesses, their locations, their response times. As a result, You got Israeli settlers running, leaving. This was the busiest day at Ben Gurion Airport since October 7th. Can you imagine? When you have a colony and the colonizers start running, that's the end of the colony. At the first sign of trouble, the Israelis rush to the airport and they whip out their second passports so they can go back to safety in their original countries. Palestinians got nowhere to go, and they wouldn't go anyway. You know why? Because it's their land. That's the difference.
Scott Ritter's here. He's a one-time Marine intelligence officer who served in the former Soviet Union, implementing arms control agreements. And from 1991 to 1998, he served as the chief inspector for the United States in Iraq, leading the search for Iraq's prescribed weapons of mass destruction. So, Scott, you wrote this, The Missiles of April, and it says Iran's retaliatory attack on Israel will go down in history as one of the greatest victories in this century. Now, before we get to you talking about that, I wanted to show you that. So, Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus and killed some top officials in the military of Iran, so they get to respond under the international law. And so they did. And this is from Uncover News. It says, outstanding video of Iran targeting Israel's air defense system. Iranian missiles with decoy bomblets are first deployed, and then several ballistic missiles hit their intended target. See? So here's all there's all the missiles coming in, right? So they're trying to overwhelm the Iron Dome, right? And now Israel said they got 99% of the missiles they knocked down, but as this video is going to show in a second here, a couple of them got through, at least a couple. Oh, here we go. So they all look, they got through. There's another one got through. Here comes another one. Boom, here comes another one. Bumanaw says that here's why you shouldn't believe Israel's claim that most missiles were shot down and damage was minor. Iran hit military targets, so we won't see the damage. Remember what Nasrallah said a few weeks ago: if Hezbollah didn't film its successful operations, no one would believe them. And here's what you said. You said eye for an eye. Iran struck Nevatim Air Base. Now that's the base that there's two bases that Israel launched the attacks on the consulate, the Iranian consulate in Syria, and that was one of them. And so that at least 7 of its new hypersonic missiles. Nevatim is home of the F-35 fighters that attacked the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Not a single Iranian missile was intercepted. Let that sink in. Israel is defenseless. And then you modified that statement. You said the drones and missiles designed to overwhelm the Israeli defenses did their job. 40 million of hardware costs Israeli and its allies billions. None of the missiles that were intended to make impact were intercepted.
Well, let's start with the Nevatim Air Base, home of Israel's F-35I, their modified F-35 fighters. These are the fighters that bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus in violation of international law. But it's home to more than that. It's home to America's ANTPY-2 X-band radar, the most sophisticated anti-ballistic missile defense radar in the world. We have it there. This is the radar designed to detect Iranian missile launches from Iran. It's tied into our satellite network that monitors Iran continuously, any launch, any activity. The point I'm trying to make is that we have given Israel perfect ability to monitor Iran's missiles. Israel can't be taken by surprise. Anything Iran does, Israel will know. This surveillance technology is linked to the most sophisticated anti-ballistic missile defenses in the world. The Arrow 2, the Arrow 3, David Sling. These are all U.S.-Israeli projects. The improved Patriot, the THAAD missile system, which is an American-only missile system. We've deployed all these around Nevatim. My point is, Nevatim is the most heavily secured spot on the planet. The most heavily secured spot on the planet when it comes to anti-ballistic missile defense. There's no place on Earth more heavily defended than Nevatim. And Iran launched, we now have updates, 7 missiles against Nevatim. 5 of them hit their target. The most heavily defended spot in the world, right there, everything, the best. Nobody has better equipment than what's there. Iran launched 7 missiles against that base. 5 of them hit their target. That means that Israel is defenseless. It means America is defenseless. It means if Iran wanted to have saturated that base with missiles, they would have destroyed everything. Iran was simply making a point. They didn't want to destroy the base. They wanted to prove to Israel that we can touch you anytime we want to. Iran did not use its latest technology. The missiles that were shown there, the newest one is about 7 years old. The other one is about a dozen years old. But first of all, you have the warhead that shoots the bomblets out. This is designed to dazzle a radar, meaning that the radar is tracking this system in. The first thing that happens is the warhead separates from the missile body. That drives the radar crazy now because it's tracking 2 things instead of 1. One is now spinning out of control larger. They're trying to track that. The other one smaller is moving in. So they have to pick which target's the priority. They pick the smaller target. So now they come in, they start calibrating, and they start launching their missiles to take it out. And suddenly that warhead shoots off a whole bunch of bomblets that simulate the warhead. The radar goes crazy now. Instead of 1, there's like 20. And it's going, what the hell do we hit now? What the hell do we hit now? And then to confuse it even more, that warhead waits, and then ignites its own motor and shoots through. And that what you saw up there was all the bomblets getting hit. And then that warhead shoots through. And at the last second, if you slow that down, you'll see that the warhead came in, it tucked up, went in, it maneuvered in to hit the target. It can't be shot down. That's what the Israelis did. The second, and they used another maneuvering warhead to strike the base in Nevatim. These are good warheads that the Iranians have. They're better than our ability to shoot them down, but they're not the best that Iran has. Iran has hypersonics. But I found out later on, initially, there was talk that hypersonic missiles were used. The Iranians have clarified that, said we didn't use any of our hypersonic missiles. If they'd used hypersonic missiles, they would come in extraordinarily fast, not using a ballistic arc with maneuvering warhead. You wouldn't have seen them. They would have just hit the ground and blown up. But remember, this is an Israel that has assassinated Iranian nuclear scientists in Tehran. They sent assassins in to kill them. They also sent people in to blow up Iranian factories. They've been attacking Iranian generals and officers in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq with impunity. And I think they believed that Iran had been intimidated, that Iran wouldn't retaliate, that Iran was scared to retaliate. And so they felt that they could carry out this action and that Iran wouldn't do anything in retaliation.
So would it be in everyone's interest to let the Israeli people and the press and Benjamin Netanyahu say that the Iron Dome worked and only 1%, we got 99% of the missiles, and so they could declare victory, so they could save face, so they wouldn't have to launch a response? Is that possible?
That was the American objective. If you noticed immediately, the United States was saying, we shot down 99% of these things, we blew everything up, there's nothing happening, what got through didn't do any damage. This is the biggest victory in the world. Israel has done the greatest victory in the world. It's wonderful. Hoorah. We don't even have to worry about those Iranians. They gave us their best shot. We went in the ring. They hit us with everything they had, their Sunday punch, and it glanced off the chin. Now the Iranians realize they can't do anything. They're hiding in a corner, and they conceded the ring to us. They didn't answer the bell. That's what they should be saying right now. And but the problem is the Israeli leadership knows the truth. And Israel is a democracy still, and the press will find out the truth. And eventually the leadership will be confronted with the fact that the exact opposite is what happened. And that's what's happening now. Their leadership understands that all of Israel knows that Iran can destroy them, and that if they want to stay in power, they're going to have to demonstrate to the Iranians that the price Iran will pay for attacking Israel is prohibitively high.
A reckless and dangerous thing for Iran to have done. And I think the whole world can see all these countries that have somehow wondered, well, what is the true nature of Iran? It's there in black and white.
What would Britain do if a hostile nation flattened one of our consulates?
Well, we would take the very strong action.
And Iran would say that that's what they did.
So she's a congresswoman from Texas. Iran is a terrorist nation. They have just launched a disproportionate attack against our ally Israel. She says the free world and the United States will stand against this terrorist nation and the tyranny that it promotes. Jesus Christ, I mean, Dick Cheney could have written this, or David Frum. The free world and the United States. What is this crap? What are you, in 2001? The free world.
Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State and CIA Director, now Fox News contributor. Iran has a $1 million bounty on of the.
Well, Martha, it's great to be with you. I think what we can see is the risk is pretty significant. It sounds like they have pretty specific intelligence about a relatively imminent attack. They may know more than they've even let on about both timing and the nature of that attack. I haven't seen the intelligence, obviously. But Martha, as a policy matter, what I think this suggests is we've lost the bubble. We've lost deterrence. Right? The Iranians have already attacked Israel once on October 7th through their proxy Hamas. They're continuing to fire on American interests in the region now over.
Again, I'll repeat to you that nobody knew in the resistance axis, neither Hezbollah nor Syria nor Iran, none of them knew that Hamas were going to attack on October 7th. And again, when we use the verb attack, it makes it sound like, they started the fight. Dude, the Israelis have been attacking for 75 years. Actually, it's much more than that, right? Because they were already emigrating en masse for 40 years before there was any Israel. Joe Biden, remember, I covered the nuclear deal negotiations on the ground. I was there. And they were very close to signing it again. But then the Americans, they dropped everything. They dropped everything. They also put limitations on Iran with the SWIFT system. Iran was the first one to be banned from it. I mean, insane things, right? Insane things. Where you're really, it's like a siege. In the old days, in medieval times, when they would surround a town or a castle, and they would wait it out till the people inside ran out of food and died. A siege, right? You trap the people in a circle. This is the modern equivalent. Sanctions are the modern equivalent of a siege.
Yesterday, we got news that the IDF accomplished its most significant assassination to date of a top Hamas political figure, but this one was in Beirut. Here's footage from the aftermath of that attack. So we're told that Salih al-Arori, who was a deputy political leader in Hamas's political wing, was killed in an attack. He had been a target of Israel's for a very long time. The U.S. had him on a hit list as well. This is the highest-ranking official that Israel has killed since October 7th, according to the reports that we're getting. The fact that it did not happen in Gaza, but instead in Beirut, is creating concern about the spiraling escalation of this conflict, but also from the other direction, raising questions among some people that if they have this intelligence capacity and if this is what they were doing, they would have maintained a lot of global support. Even though this is a political figure, he's connected to the Al-Qassam brigades, rather than dropping 2,000-pound bombs to go after low-level Hamas figures and kill dozens to hundreds of civilians at the same time, with a casualty rate climbing over 22,000, with a lot of people unable to find food all day long at this point. If they'd have taken a more targeted approach, I think they would have maintained more support around the world. And the the historical path that led us up to this neighborhood is also pretty interesting. So this was in the Dahia neighborhood. To run it back to how you even have a Hamas leader hanging out in that neighborhood at all, you have to go back. You can go back as far as you want, because in the late 1970s, after the PLO was kicked out of Jordan, they go into southern Lebanon, and then Israel pushes the PLO from there up into Beirut, and then and southern Lebanon. And then in 1982, they invade southern Lebanon with this kind of scorched earth approach. After so much civilian death, after such a broad assault on the civilian infrastructure in Lebanon, which was deliberately done to kind of turn the civilian population in Lebanon against the PLO agrees. with international mediators that they will leave. They will leave. They will get on boats, leave the port of Beirut. They go to Tunisia and other places. The agreement that they got from the U.S. and from other international forces was that there would be an international force that would protect the civilian population. So they're saying, look, if we're going to leave to protect the civilians, then somebody has to protect them. You can't just leave them at the mercy of the IDF. Right after the last PLO official gets on a boat, the international forces leave. Israel then, IDF carries out some of the most brutal massacres in Israel's history in southern Lebanon. The names of them ring out today. And so they then occupy Lebanon up until 2000. They leave after kind of a little guerrilla war in which Hezbollah has become like a real force between 82 and 2000 in reaction to this war. Then in 2006, they invade again. And they destroy the Dahiyya neighborhood so massively that it creates this thing called the Dahiyya Doctrine, because there have been some Hezbollah fighters that were using this neighborhood, the one where we just saw the images from, to launch some rockets from there. And so they said, they came up with what's called the Dahiyya Doctrine. If any civilian area is used by fighters to fight against the IDF, we're going to just completely annihilate in a disproportionate way. Flatten it.
Parking lot.
We're going to turn it into a parking lot. So it became known as the Dahiyya Doctrine. And that's, in fact, what they did. So let's start with Ben-Gvir, if we can put up this. So he writes, the war presents an opportunity to concentrate on encouraging the migration of the residents of Gaza. This is Ben-Gvir telling reporters. And he says, we cannot withdraw from any territory we are in the Gaza Strip. Not only do I not rule out Jewish settlement there, I believe it is also an important thing.
The Lebanese resistance group, Hezbollah, what they did is they fired a volley, a barrage of 60 Katyusha rockets at the Israelis in the Golan Heights in Syria. So remember, the Golan Heights have been illegally occupied by Israel since 1967. UN Security Council Resolution 242 and others specifically call on the Israelis, demand that the Israelis leave Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and also separate resolutions say that their annexation of these territories is also illegal, right, in 1980 and 81. So, this is Syria. It's Syria. But the Israelis occupy it. Just like they've stolen all of Palestine, they've stolen bits of Syria and the resources therein as well. And what Hezbollah did today is they fired at the Golan Heights, which are occupied by the Israelis. So here are the Golan Heights. Okay, I'm zooming out a little bit. The Israelis, they are fighting here in the south, in Gaza, and then to the north, they are fighting both Syria and Lebanon. So today what Hezbollah did is they fired from Lebanon into the Golan Heights. Again, you can see these dotted lines here. These are the illegally occupied Golan Heights. Now, Trump, he also did the Abraham Accords. Then he also, he decided that the Golan Heights, which I'm talking about right now, are apparently Israeli, like as if they belong to him. Well, they don't belong to him. They belong to Syria. But he said that the State Department from now on would draw maps that say that the Golan Heights are part of Israel and not Syria. So he basically okayed Israel's theft, its annexation of a chunk of Syria that is enormously strategic militarily, full of resources, and simply in violation of international law, and certified by Security Council resolution. So the problem with Syria is that they were in a very tricky position because they were able to fight off Al-Qaeda, they were able to fight off ISIS, and take back most of the territory, but unable to get rid of the Israelis. This has been the case since 1967 and further exacerbated by the war. Syria is running on low fuel. It's on an empty tank. There's no food. The United States are stealing the oil as well, basically destroying the economy, starving Syrians. You've got Syria carved up in four pieces, basically, the Americans, Turks, Israelis, and then, what the government control, and not to mention ISIS. So to have Hezbollah, to have Iran, to have Yemen, not just backing the Palestinians, but this is also favorable for Syria. This takes a little bit of the weight off of Syria, not too much significantly, but the fact that the Israelis are now worried more about Hezbollah and Hamas than they are about, making life hell for Syrians, even though this is still the case, it does take a little bit of weight off of Syria.
So this is a CNN report from 3 years ago. We're just going to play a couple of minutes of it to give you some sense. I'm going to warn you, these images are very disturbing of starving children.
There's a stark warning tonight that millions of children in Yemen could be pushed to the brink of starvation unless international aid is dramatically stepped up. It comes from UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Organization. The country faces the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with the COVID-19 pandemic compounding the effect of 5 years of civil war. Houthi rebels backed by Iran have been fighting Yemen's government, itself backed by a Saudi-led coalition, which is supported by the US and the UK. 2 million of Yemen's children are malnourished, and 1.7 million have been forced to flee their homes. With only half of the country's health facilities in operation, one child dies every 10 minutes from a preventable disease. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen sent this report, and I must warn you, there are distressing images right from the start.
Selwa Al-Odabi is 5, the same age as the war. Selwa has cerebral atrophy, brain damage caused by malnutrition she's had since she was 2 months old. The vicious mixture that is destroying Yemen is killing her. A man-made war, man-made hunger, and the coronavirus pandemic's grip on a broken country. Selwa is not the only one. UNICEF says malnutrition has caused permanent mental and physical damage to 45% of Yemen's under 5s.
Danny, you want to give us some background on how Yemen got to that state and the US's complicity in that?
Well, all of the weapons, the bombs that Saudi Arabia has dropped on Yemen, the blockade, the vicious siege that it waged upon Yemen, all of that was backed by the United States and was supplied by the United States. And so this really has been a U.S. war from the very beginning, when it launched in 2014, 2015 to stop Ansar Allah.
Hang on, wasn't that Barack Obama? That wasn't Donald Trump?
That was.
Oh.
This was a war where the casualties, the casualties in Yemen, more than 500,000 people, and half of those died in the wreckage of the war. Half of them have died for humanitarian reasons outlined in that video. And all of those deaths do fall at the feet of the Obama administration, because it was under the Obama administration where U.S. personnel, logistical personnel, were working directly with Saudi Arabia and UAE, the two principal countries that were bombing, destroying, torturing. There was widespread torture of Ansar Allah and anyone related, right? Does it sound familiar? It's really the war on terror continuing. It's really a redux, which is what we're seeing now in relation to the Biden administration's bombing of Yemen. So all this is connected. And how did we get here? It was years and years and years where got so little attention that it was difficult to even mention what was going on in this region, given that the U.S. was trying to, at the same time, overthrow the Syrian government. It was staging a coup in Ukraine and attempting, as we now know, to militarize Ukraine to fight Russia, which is exactly what ended up happening when Russia launched a special military operation in February 2022. So this war has gone through all of these attempted regime change wars of the United States, and the casualties have been absolutely enormous. The interesting thing is that Ansar Allah has not killed anyone, yet they have been labeled terrorists. And if you post anything on X, for example, you post anything on X about this, you will get a flood of replies from a lot of people across the political spectrum, many of them liberals, saying, oh, the FBI should, watch out for you because Ansar Allah is considered just a terrorist group. And that's how they have been labeled ever since the United States and Saudi Arabia launched their war on Yemen in 2014, 2015. Just another group of terrorists that have to be eradicated, when in fact they're a legitimate political movement that now is the legitimate government of Yemen.
All right, so you mentioned the protests. So millions filled the street in Yemen as Houthi rebels promise revenge against the U.S. after 73 strikes hit Yemen regions, killing 5 people. Quote, the American and British enemy bears full responsibility for its criminal aggression against our Yemeni people, and it will not go unanswered and unpunished. The Houthis promise to continue attacking cargo ships in their support of Palestinians. Their attacks are having real impact, as Tesla recently announced they had to close their Germany factory due to delays. It didn't have to be this way.
After October 7th, when Israel opened up the gates of hell on Gaza and effectively totally obliterated North Gaza and now is in the process of doing that in South Gaza as well, the only other country that stepped up to say, we're not going to let this stand, we want to fight back, is Yemen. There's been some chest puffing of Iran, and there's been some tit-for-tat fighting from Hezbollah in Lebanon against the IDF, but Yemen actually officially declared war and jumped in. Now, of course, geographically, Yemen is kind of far from Israel, so they can only do so much, but they sent some drones, they sent some missiles, and none of them really connected with any targets or got any casualties. But the most important thing they did was start seizing ships that were bound for Israel or had Israeli owners. By seizing the ships that are bound for Israel or have Israeli owners, what they're doing is throwing a wrench in global trade. And so you already have some very high insurance rates for ships that have to go to Israel. Well, now those insurance rates are up massively. By some reports, up to 300% increase in the insurance rates. Now, because of those naval actions taken by Yemen, the U.S. has now gotten directly involved in the war and attacked Yemen. So here's what they say in the Hill. U.S. and U.K. shoot down 15 drones launched from Yemen over the Red Sea.
Four out of the 5 largest container shipping companies, CMA CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, Maersk, and MSC, have now paused or suspended their services in the Red Sea. Together, those 4 companies account for 53% of the global container trade. So the amount of container shipping traffic currently going through the Red Sea has gone down dramatically in the days since the war. And actually, currently, just this morning, I saw the update. 46 separate container ships are now diverting around the Cape of Good Hope rather than transiting the Red Sea, which is an extraordinary cost in the amount of fuel that you have to pay. And obviously, all of that is going to get transited to American consumers and to really global consumers. This is significantly going to have an impact on the price of oil as well. So British Petroleum announcing this morning they will no longer transit through the Suez Canal and through the Red Sea. I mean, that's almost 10% of global supply. So all of this is going to have significant upward pressure on prices, just as we're already dealing with the quote-unquote Ukraine tax from whatever's happening with our Western sanctions and also out of the Black Sea fleet, etc. This also comes on the heels and is a major challenge right now to the supremacy of the U.S. Navy. So let's go and put this up there right now. The U.S. and the British Navy now say that they have shot down 15 attack drones just yesterday over the Red Sea. These suspected attack drones were going after commercial shipping. It's important for us to note here, the commercial shipping vessels that are being targeted are not just Israeli. They are U.S. flagged, British flagged, and all kinds of different nations, as I've mentioned previously. The increase in these attack drones or quote-unquote unmanned aerial systems that are being shot down, I think just really highlights to me, Crystal, the cost of asymmetric warfare. Every missile that we or the Brits launch against these drones costs $1 million, maybe a little bit more. And if you factor in oil, the price of the guys on the ship and all this other stuff, it's probably even more than that. Each one of these drones costs $25,000. So every single drone is costing Americans $1 million in weaponry that we are used to shoot these things down.
تجدد تحذيرها لكافة السفن التابعة للعدو الإسرائيلي أو التي تتعامل معه بأنها سوف تصبح هدفا مشروعا للقوات المسلحة.
Shipping operations in the Red Sea are coming to a standstill. The Iran-aligned rebel group Houthis attack cargo ships passing through Bab el-Mandeb. This comes as an attempt to stop the ongoing Israeli war on Gaza, resulting in the killing of more than 20,000 people in less than 3 months. Can the Houthi attacks force Israel and its allies for a ceasefire, as a significant portion of the global trade depends on the safety of the Red Sea route? Israeli ports seem calmer than ever, as the blockade in the Red Sea has caused serious disruptions. 99% of Israel's imports depend on sea routes. Additionally, 25% of Israel's trade is conducted with Far Eastern countries, indicating that 30% of its imports are routed through the Red Sea. This underscores the indispensability of the Red Sea route for the Israeli economy. Since the onset of Houthi attacks, Israel's Eilat and Ashkelon ports have ceased to receive ship, and operations at the Ashdod port have nearly ground to a halt. Is the Red Sea crisis only Israel's problem? Apparently no. The Red Sea route is indeed vital for global trade. Ships are required to navigate through Bab el-Mandeb, proceed to the Red Sea, and enter the Suez Canal. This crucial route manages 12% of global trade and a significant 40% of trade between Europe and Asia. However, within a month, Red Sea traffic experienced a 40% decline, prompting many major shipping companies to announce rerouting plans to Africa, resulting in the addition of 6,000 nautical miles to the usual route. As a result, oil prices witnessed 4% surge and natural gas prices rose by 13%. The shipping cost from Asia to the Mediterranean Sea through the Suez Canal has reached $2,414 for a 40-foot container, indicating a 62% increase since the end of November. Insurance, freight, and container costs increased dramatically as well.
The U.S. just designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization for what amounts to trying to stop Israel's genocide. In their statement explaining their rationale, the State Department says pretty candidly that they made the decision because Yemen's Houthi movement, whose real name is Ansar Allah, has been blocking Israeli and U.S. ships from passing through the Red Sea. Now, the stated purpose of Ansar Allah's blockade is to uphold Article 1 of the UN Genocide Convention. And given Yemen is a member to the UN Genocide Convention, Ansar Allah says they have an obligation to stop the shipment of weapons and other supplies to Israel while it commits a genocide. Now, this blockade, which again is meant to stop a genocide, fits, according to the U.S., the textbook definition of terrorism. It's hard to even know where to start with this, because the U.S. is saying that the terrorists aren't the ones perpetrating a genocide or the ones giving weapons to the ones committing the genocide, but the ones who are trying to stop the genocide. The designation also says that another dimension of Ansar Allah's terrorism is that their blockade has disrupted the free flow of international commerce. But the U.S. disrupts the free flow of international commerce all the time. The U.S. has laws that ban companies from buying and selling products from certain countries. The U.S. uses its control of the international banking system to deny entire countries access to international trade and credit. The U.S. even has a policy of seizing resources and assets of countries it doesn't like. Designating Ansar Allah as terrorists for setting up a blockade is also deeply ironic because, as many people have pointed out, the U.S. is currently enforcing 2 unilateral economic blockades of Cuba and Venezuela. And unlike Ansar Allah's blockade of Israel, which has yet to actually kill anyone, the U.S. blockade of Venezuela has killed thousands of people. It's estimated that the U.S. blockade of Venezuela has killed over 100,000 Venezuelans because the blockade makes it illegal for companies conducting trade with Venezuela to also trade with the U.S., which leads countries to abandon trade with Venezuela and causes mass shortages of things like fuel and medicine. Ansar Allah is using their blockade to stop a genocide, whereas the U.S.'s blockades are intended to starve and collectively punish the countries they target and could be considered a form of genocide. But yes, Ansar Allah, who the Biden administration took off the foreign terrorist list 3 years ago, are now terrorists again because their actions have caused, in the words of the White House, quote, weeks of delays in product shipping times. Israel imports 99% of its imported goods by sea. A quarter of these imports come from Asia, and their closest port to Asia is the port of Eilat. The port of Eilat, which is on the Red Sea, is now blocked by Ansar Allah and has seen an 85% decrease in activity. Maritime insurance premiums have also gone up more than 40%, and these shipping companies, they're going to pass these costs on to Israeli consumers, which is going to cause prices to rise and imported goods to become more scarce. This war is kind of like something that resembles an economic recession for Israel. The Israeli Treasury predicts that Israel's GDP will have fallen 15% in the fourth quarter, and that the war will cost Israel a total of $58 billion, which is 10% of the entire economy. State Department records show that for decades, U.S. elites were concerned that they would lose control of the Red Sea. And in 2015, the U.S. would go on to arm, fund, and support a genocidal war waged by Saudi Arabia against Ansar Allah. This war pushed 2/3 of the Yemeni population to the brink of starvation and caused the worst cholera outbreak in human history, but it still failed to defeat Ansar Allah. And now, the same Yemeni people who faced a U.S.-backed genocide only a few years ago are now mounting the most disruptive actions against the U.S.-backed genocide in Gaza. It wasn't so long ago when the U.S. considered Nelson Mandela and his supporters terrorists, and then they defeated South African apartheid. But in Palestine and the Middle East, the real terrorists are the ones who are carpet bombing hospitals, schools, and entire neighborhoods.
The government of Yemen made a declaration saying, hey, listen, we want to support the Palestinians. They are undergoing a genocide. So we are going to try to prevent shipping through the Red Sea. And, Rania, if you look at a map, the Red Sea is pretty narrow. So where Yemeni territorial waters go out, it's very hard for ships to actually completely avoid Yemeni territorial waters. That means that the government of Yemen says, we're going to exercise sovereignty. We're going to, hit at ships that are carrying weapons to Israel. If Yemen was any other country, then Antony Blinken or a subordinate would have flown into Sana'a, would have met the political leadership of the Yemeni government, the main political party, Ansar Allah, would have discussed with them, hey, listen, we don't think it's a good idea, global shipping, blah, 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 we don't know what's carrying what, and started a diplomatic conversation. But no, because the global north sees certain countries basically as what an Israeli called human savages, you just hit them immediately. That you have a big hammer and you see them as a nail and bam. Sudan, 1996. The Clinton administration, United States, decided that Sudan had been party to the bombing of the embassies in East Africa, U.S. embassies. Maybe that was true, but there was no visit to Khartoum to go and discuss with the government of Omar al-Bashir what's the situation. Instead, send in missiles and destroy the only factory in Africa that produced drugs for malaria, the Al-Shifa factory. Or Afghanistan, 2001. There's an attack on the United States, Pentagon, World Trade Center, and so on. The Taliban government says, we want to negotiate. Here's the white flag of Pali. Can we talk? No. Smack them down. So, this idea, I've just given you 3 examples. If you have a big enough hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. And right now, the global north has such a big hammer that it can blow up any bridge in the world, any bridge. But it doesn't know how to build them. It can blow up any bridge, but they're not going to build them. And I think that's an important point, is that the global north right now is able to exercise violence against the world, but it's not able to exercise leadership. And that's why the world is right now scoffing at the United States or France. And that's why the government of Niger says, we need you out of here.
U.S. to relist Yemen's Houthis as specially designated global terrorists. The Biden administration is expected to soon announce plans to redesignate Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen as specially designated global terrorists, according to two people familiar with the White House decision and a U.S. official. The move comes as the Houthis have launched dozens of attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The group says it has attacked the ships in response to Israel's military operations in Gaza in the aftermath of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken delisted the Houthis as both a foreign terrorist organization and as specially designated global terrorists in February 2021, as the administration sought to make it easier to get food imports and humanitarian aid into Yemen. Yemen, on the tip of the Arabian Peninsula bordering the Red Sea, is the poorest country in the Arab world. War and chronic misgovernment have left 24 million Yemenis at risk of hunger and disease as of 2023, and roughly 14 million in acute need of assistance, the United Nations said. About 2/3 of Yemenis live in territory controlled by the Houthis. While, you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like the legitimate government of the country.
Remember I asked, why they call the rebels, how much they control?
Yeah, they control most of the country. It kind of sounds like that's the government.
Yeah.
While supporters of broad sanctions argue it's possible to shape any enforcement mechanisms so as to exempt food and humanitarian aid organizations worry that fears of running afoul of U.S. regulation could scare away shippers, banks, and other players vital to Yemen's commercial food supply. Average Yemen imports 90% of its food. Quote, this designation would add another level of uncertainty and threat for Yemenis still caught in one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, said Scott Paul, an associate director of Oxfam America. Quote, the Biden administration is playing with fire, and we will call on them to avoid this designation immediately and prioritize the lives of Yemenis now. Now, these poor people, we showed a video last week of their children just starving to death there. And these are the people that we are now going to reimpose sanctions on.
This is now,
but you know, what's that?
This is now when the Saudis were siege.
That video was from before, but you don't just recover from that in a couple of years. But you know, we're pretty sanction happy. Here's a little color-coded map. The red are broad sanctions against the country. So you can see that's a lot of the globe. Obviously, Russia there. Israel, this is from 2021. Israel has struck at least 12 ships carrying Iranian oil to Syria. According to the Wall Street Journal, since 2019, Israel has struck Syria-bound ships carrying Iranian oil out of fear it would fund regional extremism, unlike Israel, which is the moderating force in the region. And this is from In These Times. This is actually by Noam Chomsky from 2010. For decades, Israel has been hijacking boats between Cyprus and Lebanon and killing or kidnapping passengers, sometimes holding them hostage in Israeli prisons. So this, you can look this up. This is called The Real Threat Aboard the Freedom Flotilla.
Yeah.
The United States said that it sold oil from Iran seized on its way to Venezuela, two countries under U.S. economic sanctions for more than $40 million. So apparently we get in on the Piracy Act too, and we seize people's ships.
Privateers. We're privateers.
We're private. Very good. The U.S. and its client states have illegally hijacked commercial vessels, killing and torturing its crew and civilians for literally decades with total impunity, as the Western media class cheers it on as the height of morality. And now they're crying crocodile tears about Yemen.
Part of what Hamas was hoping for post-October 7th was that when Israel retaliated, the Arab states would unite behind Gaza. And that doesn't seem to be working out, at least to the extent that they hoped it would. In terms of the Houthis, yes, they are making a stand, but it just goes to show you the evil of this empire, that we took our foot a little bit off their necks when they were being starved and bombed by the Saudis, and as soon as they fucked with us, we put it right back on.
Yep.
I don't think 2/3 of that's a really annoying thing, that the 2/3 of the people live in the Houthi. So, you know, the country.
Yet
again, like
well, they're making it like it's a fringe terrorist organization. It's literally the legitimate government of most of the country.
Yeah. This is the end of cancel culture.
But it's a real rebuke to other countries in the region that only the poorest of them is willing to stand up and fight for the Palestinians.
For more, we're joined by Helen Lackner, the author of several books on Yemen, including Yemen in Crisis, The Road to War, and Yemen, Poverty and Conflict. She's joining us from Oxford, England. Helen Lackner, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you tell us who the Houthis are and explain what their demands are, the significance of what's happening in the Red Sea?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, I think I'll start with the second half of your question, which relates directly to what has been happening and the various announcements you've just made. And the Houthis have been extremely explicit and repeat on an almost daily basis that their attacks on ships in the Red Sea will stop as soon as the Gaza war ends and humanitarian and other supplies are allowed into Gaza, and therefore the Palestinians will no longer be under the threat and the horrors that you've earlier described and that most of us have seen on our screens for many, many weeks. So the important thing is that although the US and the UK claim that they're only defending free movement in the Red Sea and refuse to accept any connection between this and the war in Gaza, for the Houthis it's absolutely straightforward and explicit that, number one, they're only targeting ships that have any connection with Israel, whether they're going to Israel, coming from Israel, delivering stuff, owned by Israelis or whatever. Since the US and UK strikes have started, they're also targeting US and UK ships. So they're absolutely explicit that all other ships are welcome to travel through the Red Sea, and that there is complete freedom of movement for any ship other than an Israeli or UK or US connected one.
So just to clarify, what was the point at which the Iranians started backing the Houthis? Was it in the moment when the Saudi-led bombing began in 2015, or was it prior to that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up these points. The Iranian role at the time in 2015, when the internationalized civil war started, was minimal. The Iranian involvement with the Houthis, and prior to that, and since then, has always been connected with partly theological connections, but differences. So in that sense, the Houthis are differentiating themselves from other Zaydis by having adopted a number of the rituals and activities and approaches of the Iranian Twelvers. It's all a matter of how many imams they trust or they believe in after the Prophet Muhammad. But in practice, the Houthis are getting closer to the Iranians to the Iranian Shiism over the last decades. But they are still the last decade. But they're still quite distinct. So the alliance is much more a political alliance. And the Iranian involvement, which was really very, very insignificant at the beginning of this war, has increased over time and is primarily, has been for a while mainly financial and providing fuel and things like that to the Houthis, but more recently has been much more focused on military activity. But it's very important to note that the Houthis are an independent movement. The Houthis are not Iranian proxies. They are not Iranian servants. They don't do what the Iranians tell them to do. They make their own decisions. If their decisions and their policies coincide with those of Iran, then, there's no issue. But if they don't do it. So it's very important, I think, to destroy this myth of, Iran-backed Houthis in a single word, as if it's kind of a conglomerate. That is not the case.
You have seen how the Israelis treat Palestinians in captivity. Just awful, awful stuff. Now, I want to show you the opposite. These are the Yemenis. You remember when they captured Galaxy Leader, this giant ship? They took the crew hostage, so 25 of them, and they are still in captivity. And now they've just been visited by the Red Cross for the first time. Remember, Israel allow 0 Red Cross visits to any prisoners and hostages. So I'll just show you some of the videos here.
Red Cross messages, so news from their family, and we also ask them to bring their news to their family.
ولكنهم أخبروهم بأنهم يقوموا بالتواصل بشكل دوري مع أهاليهم عبر الفيديو، وأنهم ليسوا بحاجة إلى إرسال أي رسائل إلى أهاليهم باعتبارهم يتواصلون بشكل دائم. تمت المهمة بنجاح وزاروهم ووجدوا أنهم في حالة صحية جيدة، في حالة نفسية جيدة. يتمنوا.
You can see they're all wearing the Palestinian scarves. So this is the crew that you see on the screen right now.
أن يغادروا، والأمر المغادرة هو مرتبط بالتفاوض مع الأخوة في حماس كما أعلنت صنعاء ذلك سابقا.
So you see them, they're in good spirits, they're not being tortured, they are being treated well, humanely, they can speak to their families. Look, no one is saying it's a nice situation. Personally, I think they should have released them. I don't think this brings anything to have them in captivity. But nevertheless, we are comparing here, we're drawing a comparison. And yeah, here you can see when they were going up to the ship.
We are already 6 months here in the ship, and I like only to speak toward peace, freedom for the Palestinian, and stop the war and ceasefire.
I'll show you some more photographs here. Here's the crew, and they're just lounging about and chilling. There are some more interviews that they did with them. I'll play them for you.
Also, we would like to thank for the Yemen people for the warm welcome. Thank you for the hospitality, and they're good for us for sure. But we only have concern about our family. That's why, if possible, we can be released as soon as possible.
So yeah, Ukraine, Mexico, Romania, Bulgaria, and Philippines. These are the respective governments of the hostages. And what Yemen are trying to do here is just apply pressure on those governments to apply, in turn, pressure on the Israelis. You remember when they first took them hostage, they said, "You are Yemenis. We'll get you anything you want. Anything you desire is yours." But obviously, it's not a nice situation for the hostages. Now, again, my job here is to show you the news and also to contrast with what we just saw with CNN, for example, with how they treat captives. And I mean, whether we're talking about Hamas or we're talking about the Houthis, they both treat their prisoners, their hostages, their captives, their detainees with respect. They actually care for their human rights. They really mean that. It's not something they say. They just do it. If we look at the West Bank, you got over 8,000, almost 9,000 that have been arrested since October 7, So yes, it's not nice for these 25. It's also not nice for the 8,000.
Houthis have made a humanitarian intervention in the Red Sea in an effort to bring the genocide in Gaza to an end. The Houthis have killed nobody while disrupting shipping in the Red Sea, ships which are facilitating the Israeli genocide. The Israeli regime has killed over 23,000 civilians. Over 10,000 of them are children. So who did the US and the UK attack? No, they didn't attack the Israeli regime because they're supporting the genocide. They attacked the Houthis instead, killing at least 6 people. So Western powers are prepared to kill people to protect the movement of goods. But the same Western powers killed thousands with sanctions in Iran, in Syria, in Venezuela, preventing the movement of some goods. The Houthis are showing solidarity with the Palestinian people, just like South Africa did in The Hague. But sadly, the EU's solidarity is with US empire and the Zionists. Shame on the EU!